Good morning, Kimberlee Armstrong, Superintendent. Thank you all for being here. As you heard last night, we presented our proposed budget to the board. And while the message may be familiar, the weight of this moment has not been lessened. We are facing a $40 million deficit, and we shared our beginning steps to address that. We are in our third consecutive year of a structural deficit, right? So our expenses to run schools continue to exceed the revenue that we receive, and the gap is only widening. The budget reflects tough decisions made with students at the center. Central office took the deepest cut. We'll share more about that. We've invested over $545 million into instruction, supporting more than 7,000 employees. Now, I do want to share that last night I misstated that we were reducing 200 educator positions. That's not accurate. At our March 18th budget session with the board, we noted that our total reductions at the time included central office and was projected to be 210 positions. Based on our most recent presentation last night and an increase in central office reductions, we're now looking at school-based reductions of about 156.7 FTE, a central office reduction of 85.5 for a total staffing reduction of 242.2. Just a couple of things that I want to speak to. I know what was mentioned last night is like, what does that look like in some of our spaces? Well, we're sunsetting the International Baccalaureate program at the elementary level. We are blending in some classrooms that are at the 4th and 5th grade level. We have class size minimums at the secondary level, and so what that means is that schools will no longer be able to run classes with 15 students at the high school level. Dual language immersion staffing at middle schools is also something that we reduced. And of course, we took a look at our contracts, our partner contracts, and we made some reductions. 4.1 million reduced in schools is due to the enrollment decline. And I'm going to turn it over to our Chief Financial Officer to share a little bit more about the technical aspects of our reductions before opening up for questions.
Thank you, Dr. Armstrong. Michelle Morrison, Chief Financial Officer. She described pretty clearly the programs that would be impacted by the reductions moving into next year. We have shared those, and they were based on feedback from our school staff and our community to date. We've done several iterations of feedback sessions, and that's the proposal we brought forward. So I do want to state that this is a preliminary proposed budget that we are going to continue to revise and change our information as we get more information around both revenue and expenditures for next year.
So we'll now open up for questions.
What do you want to tell the parents of Portland Public Schools kids right now? Say something to them. What would you want to say?
I'd like to just assure them that students have been at the very center of this issue for the last several years and will continue to be in the future. Know that everyone is very passionate about their community schools and the programs that they have in there. With the continued decline in enrollment, that is what our funding is based on, and we do have to right-size our staff according to the resources we have. So continued feedback and support of their schools, volunteer, care for your kids, care for our staff.
Can I ask you the same question? What would you want us to tell the parents of Portland Public School kids right now?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say that we are making sure that our classrooms have all the essential services to be successful, that we are continuing with high quality instruction, materials that are standards aligned, and making sure that we're providing wraparound supports to our students who need it most. We still believe that Portland Public Schools is the best option and choice for families in our community, and we're going to continue to uplift those experiences. We have a workforce who are dedicated, talented, and skilled at making sure that we can do the things that we need to do on behalf of families and students.
When you say 240
242 reductions, is that layoffs of like teachers and all that? Or is that going to be like if they retire, you just won't refill the position? Or are they actually 242 layoffs?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So we have been talking about FTE, and I know that if we were to actually look at it at positions, that number would be far greater because we also recognize that we have partials, right? We may have a 0.5, a half-time teacher, or a half-time person providing support services. And so when we've been talking about the position, we're looking at FTE. And so those positions do include layoffs. It includes positions that were vacant that will remain unfilled, and it also includes positions that folks are vacating either through retirement or resignation at the end of this year. So the total amount of FTE is that 240 number.
Just define FTE for me.
Oh, full-time equivalent.
Dr. Armstrong, you recently indicated that you didn't think it was likely that school-based educators and support staff were going to be facing layoffs. That's not necessarily as true for the central office, as I understand it. Does that remain an accurate understanding?
Well, we're still in the process of identifying where openings are happening, and our teachers have the opportunity to be placed in those positions. And of course, our certificated teachers and our classified support staff that are part of a bargaining unit have access to those positions as stipulated in those bargaining agreements. And so for some of our layoffs in central office, our central office positions, many of those positions were manager, supervisor, and administrator, and there are no opportunities there unless there's an opening, and we encourage all of our staff who've been laid off, if they see a position that they're interested in, to apply for it.
Okay, and can you tell us a little bit more about those 85 cuts at the central office? What kinds of work did those folks do? You said managers, administrators, and supervisors. Can you be more specific?
Yeah, so it is, I won't be able to go through all 85 of them, but I will say on that list, we have program administrators that were responsible for executing programs. That work still needs to continue to happen, and so we're finding ways to be able to execute that work within our existing org chart structure. We also had services that provided support to schools, right? So when we talk about the central office reductions, we're talking about that 85.5 positions that are located in this building. We also recognize, though, that there are positions out in schools that we fund that are centrally supported, and all of our work are in support of classrooms. Another one that I would say is consolidating professional learning and some of the ways in which we've staffed around that at the central office level. We're also looking at a reduction in the language access support that was provided here during the day. We've had some resources that's been deployed to sites now, and when we look at the frequency of the access of that, it has declined over time, and so we've sunset that program. And that's just a few examples.
Chief Financial Officer Morrison sent me a better question for you. So I noted that the general fund budget has actually increased by about $15 million. Can you kind of just help readers understand, how it is that the general fund has increased with the FE/slash position?
Yeah, thank you. So I think as many of us are noticing in our household budgets, our revenue, our income stream is not keeping up with our expenditures. So that's due to inflation for everything from utilities to supplies, equipment, of course our staffing as well. So those are the major cost drivers for our budget, and even at the governor's recommended budget level, we are not keeping up.
Yeah, and I would just simply say $500 today is spent entirely different than $500 from last year or the year before, just to simplify it.
What's the new minimum of classroom number? I know you said like below 15, you just won't be a class. What's the actual minimum now?
The minimum set at the high school, so let me pull up our chief of schools, John Frankel, to talk about the minimum at the secondary level.
Good morning, John Franco, Chief of Schools. Sorry, what was the question?
Just the new minimum
Yeah, so, and this is not just specific to high school, it's secondary in general, so that includes middle school. So one of the things that we're very cognizant about in trying to save resources and money is that looking at class size minimum, so it's 15. So we are also very cognizant about that if a class size is 15 or lower, if it potentially means elimination of a program, we don't want to do that, and so there are exceptions that can be made, but 15 is the number.
Let's go the other end. Your minimum, what's the maximum? Should people be concerned about 40 kids in the classroom?
You know, it's a great question. Obviously, class size is something we're very cognizant about. Principals have already received their staffing, and they've had those levels of conversations with folks. And then April, we're going to be doing some scheduling workshops, and those are up to principal discretion in regards to class size.
You also mentioned blending classrooms. What exactly does that, blending grade levels, or what exactly?
Yeah, so basically, in a nutshell, we allotted staff specific at the elementary level, which is K-5, looking at blending in the intermediate grades, which is 3 through 5. So, in other words, a blend could be, as opposed to having, small sections of 4th and 5th grade, looking at, okay, maybe we can have a larger section of a 4-5 blend. That's what that means.
So they'd be in the same class?
They'd be in the same class. And I will say this too, is that we also have blends that are happening now. It's very sporadic, and they've worked very well. I think the piece is that when we decided to go ahead and do this, we made sure that we're not just going to come out and say you got to blend a classroom, but what are the supports from a curriculum perspective? What are the supports from a PD instruction perspective that we need to provide? And we have a plan to do that for schools that are going to be doing blends.
So the blending can happen at all grade levels, but the minimum for classroom is from middle school and high school?
Correct.
Back in March, there was a immediate spending freeze. What impact, if any, has this had for now? And I know it was until further notice. Is there any update on that?
Yeah, thank you for your question. So the spending freeze was issued more at the central level for departments and schools as well, to ensure that there is definitely a chief level review of expenditures. Student activities and direct student services are still approved automatically, so those contacts are still happening. Plans for the remainder of the year are still happening, but there are things like professional development for staff, supplies, equipment, and technology that are just at a much higher level of review to make sure that they're a requirement and not just a replacement or something. We're just double checking everything we're doing right now.
I just want to double check. Are you saying it's declining enrollment and inflation that's the biggest driver in all of this, or how would you describe it?
Yeah, I would say declining enrollment on the revenue side of the equation is definitely a challenge for us. All schools in Oregon, regardless of where they're located, are funded on a per student basis. So that's an issue on the revenue side. For our expenditure side of the equation, we definitely have our costs are escalating at a much higher rate than they have historically. I think, and we're all experiencing that as well.
About that spending freeze, when it was announced, it was until further notice. Is there any update on how long that'll last? And it was also to navigate the budget shortfall. What have you seen? Is there any takeaways from that period?
There's a higher level of control around that, and we won't fully recognize that until after the end of the year, which is June 30th. And it will, as far as I'm concerned, it will be in place until we are out of reduction mode, which we are already anticipating for 26, 27.
There's concern too from parents about declining test scores and performance in the classroom with things like blended classes and cuts to staff. How do you, I guess, what's the message for that concern? Is this going to impact that?
I think I'm going to invite our chief of schools back up to address that question.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would also say that it is important to note that we're going to continue to do everything we can to protect student experiences. And in fact, our chief financial officer talked about some of those one-time funds that we have received that we use to, or one-time expenditures or revenue sources that we use to make sure that we can address the deficit. We know that that doesn't address the structural deficit, right? So if we're using about $1 million from travel or from the hiring freeze or from a spending freeze, that isn't an ongoing expense, and so it isn't continuing from year to year. So all of these moves and steps that we're taking this year to capture funds to put back into our schools and our classrooms are the strategies and the moves that we're making. So I just want to be really clear about that. But if you want to come up there. So.
Yeah, and I will just say this. Like, we know this is a very difficult time. I will say this, per Dr. Armstrong, she's been very clear, is that for any semblance of cut, what is the mitigating strategy that we are going to employ? And so this is not one of those things where we say, okay, it's gone, and there goes that piece of work. It's, okay, so how are we encapsulating the work in other different avenues? And I will say this too, to the families, that we've had an immense focus on what we call Tier 1 instruction. Ensuring consistency of student experience across all of our schools. And that was, you know, we're in a few years now with the adoption of an ELA and math curriculum, which has been significant. Our principals, our administrators are in classrooms more, giving feedback to teachers, really good feedback. And so we know how important that piece is, and we're going to continue to do those things that we've always done.
We have a hard out at 10, so we have time for 2 more questions.
Dr. Armstrong, I'd like to ask you about the organizational chart on page 42 of volume 1 of the budget books. I count 24 senior directors of schools in addition to 2 assistant superintendents and a number of senior chiefs, including 2 who were just given a salary increase last night. That historically seems like a pretty heavy concentration at the top, particularly when you go back and look at recent configurations at PPS. Can you address this, given that we are, that's 156 school-based cuts?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are continuing to look at staffing levels and making sure that we are addressing some of those mitigating situations that come when we're reducing a position. So when I think of, as you asked about our senior director positions, we have senior directors who sit at our academic level that are making sure that they're executing programs in like elementary, middle, and high school, leading teams of people in that work. We also have senior directors of schools who are responsible for the support, development, and growth of our 81 principals across Portland Public Schools, and we have a team of 10 right now. We are reducing to 8. So we're continuing to make strategic reductions, and we will continue to do so over time. I think we feel pretty confident that the reductions that we made this year, while incredibly painful, were the right decisions, and we will continue to address right sizing here at the central office as we continue to sit in our new reality of enrollment decline and revenue that is not keeping up with our expenditures.
Thank you. And can you address the outlook for the 2026-2027 school year as well? Are we going to be right back in this same lobby having this same press conference same time next year?
We will be back having this conversation next year. We are looking at minimum of about $30 million in reductions. So Portland, over time, has announced reductions per year, not per the every 2-year funding cycle that we're in. And so one of the reasons for that, again, are the rising costs that we are outpacing the funds that we receive, the revenue. Another one of those is that this year, when we talk about ways that we were able to address the $40 million, we didn't take that $40 million all on ongoing expenses, meaning personnel, because some of the supports that we have in classrooms and here at the central office are critical to our function and our success. And so we did use funds that were allocated one time, and that was helpful. One example of that is that in November, we found out about the 32 million in PERS that we needed to address. That was a gap in what was planned. And so we had a reserve for PERS where over the years, previous administration had strategically saved up for. And so that was about 23 million in that bucket. And we needed to expend all of those funds for this year to address that $32 million PERS deficit. We won't have those funds available in the future years, right, unless we're strategically saving. And so when we think of some of those one-time allocations that we were able to use this year to address the budget, and knowing that we won't have those next year guarantees that we will be back in front of you. Until we address the structural deficit, we will continue to have this conversation. Until we make sure that schools are funded in a way that sustains us and makes sure that we're successful, we will continue to be back in front of you. It is important that we continue to do everything that we can for our littlest learners as they enter our system as kinders or pre-K all the way through to graduation. It takes an investment from us here in Portland Public Schools, and it takes an investment from our elected officials.
Really quickly, are you able to address if anything going on federally with the cuts to the Department of Education and other funding, is that impacting the decision to have all this happen right now?
Yeah.
Or is there any correlation?
Well, we do want to be prepared for reductions at the federal level. So for our Title I fund, we have held back 25% in anticipation of any reductions. Once we know that Title I is fully funded in our federal government's budget, we will make sure that those funds are sent back out to schools so that it can address our students who are most impacted and the reason why those Title I funds exist. Was there a question over here?
Same question.
Oh, yeah, just we are being proactive and we're being very hopeful that should there be any change in our funding structure at the federal level, that our state leaders are active in that conversation and leaning in, and that we'll look for support where we can find it. And we're hopeful that that won't mean further reductions after.
Is there a typical dollar figure you get from the feds?
Yeah, we get about 55 million in federal government funds. Now, I will say that about 41 million are pass-through funds, so federal funds that go to the Oregon Department of Education and then are allocated to us, and then about 15 million, just under 15 million directly to us when thinking of those Title I, II, and III programs. I have heard that Title II is up for elimination, but the impact of that we're still weighing.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. The only thing that I want to say is that I appreciate our chief financial officer saying is that this budget is a plan, right? We are at the starting blocks. And so we will continue to engage in this conversation over the next few weeks and a couple months, but go ahead.
If declining enrollment's a problem, is there concern that blended classes could disincentivize parents from sending their kids here?
Well, I hope not. I hope that it's an incentive, right? I mean, I think that the opportunity to blend when appropriate with right support is a learning opportunity for all students in that classroom. And I want to be clear that we're not blending all 4th and 5th grade classrooms. We were strategic in the conversation. We had conversations with principals. We're making sure that we have the support that is in place to be able to enhance and support the model moving forward. But it is a typical model that exists in many systems, and we're leaning into it as a cost-saving strategy, and also because we believe in the strength in that model, and we're going to do everything we can to make sure that it's successful.
Dr. Armstrong, can you give us some closing words as we close out?
Yeah, I think when I think of what I would want to leave with you all is that we are in a defining moment. Especially knowing that our elected officials are actively discussing the funds that they'll allocate to schools across Oregon, right? That's a defining moment. When we're making choices about where we're reducing in schools and where we're reducing here is a defining moment. What we won't compromise, though, is the academic success of every single one of our students in our schools, right? I'm here because I believe that we have everything that we need in this city to lift up every single one of our public schools and the people that are within it and supporting around side of it. So I'm thankful for our educators, our support staff, and our district officials, and of course our administrators for making sure that we keep the conversation centered on students, right? We won't be rerouted. We will continue to focus on student, on learning and achievement, and I am confident that as we continue in these conversations in years to come, we will see the bar increase on student achievement.
Thank you. That's all
Thank
we
you.
have time for.
Thank you.
Thanks.